Hello queens, angels, and goddesses. Welcome back to my channel. Warning: this contains boy love, and if you don't like it then please get off my channel. Water pistol, grinning face with cowboy hat. Warning. Contains themes of suicide and self-harm. Hate. Tendao Satori's hands shook furiously as he heard the last line from the reporter on the TV. Today the world is ending, please, go be with the ones you love, farewell everyone. And the TV went black. He brought his shaky hands to his eyes, wide and unfocused. Tendao shivered and rocked in the corner of his dark room. He felt on the verge of pure panic. No. But as Tendao wrapped his arms around his legs and sobbed into his knees, he wasn't crying because he was scared of the world ending. No, that's what he had been wanting for a long time. He wept because of the wait for the world to end, the wait that would allow Tendao to think about the fact that no one loved him and no one was coming to sit by his side. His body racked with jolts and hiccups as he cried relentlessly. He stared aimlessly out the window, silent tears streaming down his face, now red and puffy. After a while he coughed and ran to the toilet, throwing up the little that was left in his stomach. He spat, trying to get the foul taste off of his tongue. He gripped the door frame as he struggled to stand up and held his head. The world spun. He paced the room and ran his long, slender fingers taped from volleyball practice earlier that day through his mess of red hair. Tendao had never had someone who loved him, no significant other to share his passions with, and no family to comfort him. His phone lay flung on his bed. There was no point in checking it. He knew there was no messages, no calls. Stumbling back, he saw his pale wrist covered in scars and his hollow cheekbones in the mirror hanging from his door. You're ugly and worthless. Nobody cares about you. You should just die already. The voice inside his head sneered. Tendao doubled over, holding his stomach and gasping for air. He shook his head, squeezing his eyes closed and trying to ignore his conscience. The voice was right, however. It had always been right for 18 years. It was always there, taunting him, jeering at him. How could anyone love a monster like him? He placed a hand on his bed frame, forcing himself to stare at the creature in the mirror. Lanky limbs hung loosely at his side and his bones stood out under his shirt as dopey grin sat on his mouth, but he wasn't happy. He looked like a clown. Red hair, pale skin, sad eyes. What else did he need? But what he hated most he couldn't bring himself to look at. Look at them, you coward. The voice spat, making Tendao flinch, whimpering as he pried his eyes open, meeting the red, bottomless pits in the mirror. He cried out and threw a marble he found on the floor at his reflection. Shattering the glass pieces flew around him and he gazed at them, in some sort of trance. Tentatively he reached for a shard, the voice in his head urging him on. He grasped the glass in his hand, and in a split second slit his wrists ever so slightly, watching the blood trickle down his arm. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. You know what to do. Go, you fool. Do what you should have done long ago. Dart. 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 Tendao burst out of his house, sprinting outside and wiping tears from his eyes. He knew what to do. The voice had been telling him for years if no one was going to be there while the world ended, he would just end it himself. What was the point of staying alive anyways? And quickly Tendao found himself at the edge of the Shiratorizawa bridge. He looked down at the raging water. No one will miss me anyways, he screamed, sobbing and pointing his head up to the sky, feeling the rain fall on his already wet cheeks. Tendao didn't know when it had started to rain, but it didn't matter. His eyes hurt and he bit his lip. His vision went blurring and he squeezed his eyes shut, fiddling with his hands. He thought, am I really doing this? Tendao. No. A voice boomed from behind. Tendao whipped around, his eyes opened wide as he saw Ashijima Wakatoshi sprinting through the rain. Panic flashed across his face as he saw Tendao on the edge of the bridge, and it almost looked like he was crying. But Tendao couldn't tell. It was probably just the rain anyways. No. Not him, anyone but him. Of course it had to be Ashijima. Tendao flipped back around and dug his fists into his eyes. His head spun and he pinched his face until it hurt, leaving bruises. Ashijima was the one person Tendao knew would try and talk some sense into him. He was the only person Tendao had ever loved, and he was the last person Tendao wanted to see right now. Many nights Tendao sobbed into his sheets, wondering what a life with him could have been like. Tendao wished to be loved, to be held so close he could feel the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. However much Ashijima had always been there for him, whether it was during his panic attacks or suicidal episodes, Tendao knew he didn't really care for him. It was a one-sided love. He was there because he had to be. That's why it hurt so much. Seeing Ashijima Wakatoshi sprinting through the storm for him, Tendao gripped a fistful of t-shirt by his heart. He could practically feel it splitting in half, the searing hot pain traveling through his spine. Suddenly a large hand gripped his shoulder. No, stop it. Stop it. Tendao yelled, wildly looking at the man behind him. He flung around and slapped Ashijima's hand off of his bony shoulder. He breathed heavily as his hands pulled at his hair, flat against his head from the rain. His breaths quickened, becoming forced and panicked. I know you don't care about me, so stop. Stop with the pity. Just let me die, he bellowed, hyperventilating and his voice becoming hoarse. Please, just let me go, Tendao whimpered, collapsing and clinging to the railing. He sobbed, tugging and gripping Ashijima's pant legs through the metal fencing. You know I can't do that, a deep voice said softly. After a moment Ashijima leaned down and grabbed Tendao's scared wrists, planting a soft kiss against each one of them. He hopped the fence and pulled Tendao into his chest. Putting his large arms around Tendao's slim waist, he sunk down to the ground and sat the redhead in his lap. Tendao snaking his cold finger behind Ashijima's neck, he straddled Ashijima's thighs, and as Ashijima wrapped his arms tighter around Tendao's delicate hips, he sighed in relief. He let his head droop onto Tendao's shoulder. Taking in the scent he'd learned to adore, Tendao pushed his nose into the groove of Ashijima's jawline and shook like a leaf in the wind. Crying and bringing his legs up to wrap around Ashijima's torso. Ashijima's heart throbbed when he felt Tendao's nose touch his jaw and his nimble fingers bury themselves in his short hair. He felt his long eyelashes against his cheek. Wet with tears flushing their bodies together, Ashijima stood up, moving his hands under Tendao for support. As he walked, Tendao moved his head to lay in the crook of Ashijima's neck, his breath shallowing as he fell peacefully asleep. Hugging Ashijima tightly, Ashijima felt his soul break in two as he saw tears drop down Tendao's pale cheeks, wiping them away with his thumb. Let's go home, Satori. Dot. 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 Tendao woke with a jolt. Was he laying on something? Ashijima's upper body was propped up against the wall, letting Tendao sleep on him. He lifted his head from Ashijima's chest and looked down to see himself in his friend's lap. Legs intertwined with each other's, Tendao's arms wrapped tightly around the spiker's toned torso, and he blushed as he felt Ashijima's hands on his slender hips. Good morning, Ashijima smiled, gazing at Tendao. How long have I? Just an hour. It's ending soon. I can tell. I knew you would ask that. Ashijima chuckled and squinted to look at the bright sky in front of them. Tendao didn't recognize where they were. All he remembered was the dark, booming sky and the bridge. It wasn't his house or Ashijima's, and it was bright and sunny. He concluded they were on a roof, under the overhang. Why are we here, Wakatoshi, Tendao began when nothing came from Ashijima. I have no family. I have no one who loves me but you. You welcomed the weird kid without judgment, and you, after all of these years, still stay by my side. Even when you could spend your last day with all of the people who you love and who love you, so thank you. Tendao smiled. Ashijima gave him a curious look and tilted his head. Tendao, what are you saying? What I'm saying, Wakatoshi, Tendao sighed. Why was he doing this? Is that I love you. I've loved you since the day I met you, and knowing that, please spend the last moments you have with the people you love. I can't let you spend the little tea time you have left with a monster like me. Tendao struggled to say through tears, turning away. Stop it, Satori. Tendao blushed at the use of his given name, and for the first time looked up to see Ashijima. What Tendao saw surprised him. He saw the stoic Wakatoshi Ashijima blushing, and not just a pale pink on the apples of his cheeks, but a bright red that reached its way up to his ears. Tendao brought a hand up to cup his cheek, and Ashijima leaned into it, closing his eyes and continuing to talk. Why would you say such a thing about yourself? Why do you assume I don't think the same of you? You are not a monster, Satori, and you never have been. Would you like to know when you stole my heart? Ashijima asked, bluntly and in all seriousness. Tendao laughed quietly. He'd expected the straightforwardness, but never expected Ashijima to be so cheesy. I what? Since when? I'm taking that as a yes then. Ashijima opened his eyes at the absence of an answer, and Tendao nodded until he thought his head would fall off. It was when you asked me about my father. You were curious when everyone else pitied me. Ever since then you never stopped talking and asking questions. I adored it. I knew when you started hurting yourself it took a piece out of me every time. You came to practice and I saw the scars on your wrists and the bruises on your back, and every day since I met you I watched your smile falter a little bit more and the bags under your eyes grow bigger. All I wanted was to protect you and I failed. So when you didn't respond to my calls or messages I knew exactly where you were. You think you're worthless Tendao, but you're everything to me. I can't live without you. I would miss you Satori. I know your mannerisms and how your brain works, so I can't let you go. I couldn't let you jump off that bridge because I love you. He looked into Tendao's eyes and smiled a real, genuine smile. Something only Tendao had ever seen. A single tear rolled down Ashijima's cheek as his golden eyes looked at him. He played with Tendao's hair and leaned in to touch their foreheads. I always liked your hair down, Ashijima murmured and rubbed his nose against the redhead's. Tendao wiped a tear away from Ashijima's face with a slim finger and intertwined one of their hands. Their lips met and their hearts felt full. Sparks seeming to fly. Tendao felt Ashijima place a hand under his chin, and all too soon, out of the corner of their eyes they saw the blinding light hurtling toward them. Tendao closed his eyes and breathed deeply, holding Wakatoshi tightly. Farewell my paradise, Tendao whispered to Ashijima, tears slipping down their cheeks. They made no sudden movements, and the only noise was the sounds of shallow breathing and hearts beating. Foreheads pressed together, they met each other's eyes. Warmth radiating from them and shining brightly. They weren't sad about the circumstances. Everything would end eventually anyways, so why not have peace? Together, even in the midst of the world crumbling around them, even though everything they had ever known was disappearing, the pair smiled as the light engulfed them. Warning: this fanfiction does not belong to me, neither does the fan art. Credits to the original artist and author to the fan art and the fanfiction. Haikyuu does not belong to me either. Well, bye children. Smiling face with hearts.